will allow is along with the transcription, if that's helpful to you. And then, as we've mentioned before, with these office hours, we do have a playlist on the department's YouTube channel, and we will be getting this particular recording uploaded to the GMU's playlist within that YouTube channel as soon as we can, because we know this is critical information for all of you as we head into the final pieces of the regular obligation period for our final round of federal relief funding. So again, we're glad to have you join us today. My name is Amber Reed, and I'm the director of the Department of Education's Office of District Support Services. And within and that's within the Student Investment Division. And within my office, we have an audit unit. We do all of the state and federal school finance reporting. And then, of course, we have our spectacular grants management unit, which is staffed with some of my favorite people in the world. I say this every month. I know you hear me say that, and it's true. That's why I keep saying it. I have the best team on the planet, and I so appreciate my analysts and all the work that they do to keep us running. They are a well-oiled machine, which makes my life infinitely easier and all of yours as well. So massive gratitude to each and every one of the analysts within the grants management unit, both state and federally funded positions. And also massive thanks to Deb Aquino, who is keeping me alive at the moment. So appreciate all that she does each and every day, and lots of times on the weekends as well. Welcome. I know some of you may be on spring break. We had a lot of out of offices. I would say if you're on spring break, I would encourage you to go ahead and log out. We are recording it, and I hope that you're enjoying some type of vacation and rest and relaxation away from your workspaces to heal and recover from, and mostly, I think, to gear up for the last few months of the school year. I think we always have March Madness, and then I believe the other type of March Madness that kicks off is, testing season. And so the last couple months of the school year are also always a little bit of a push to get everybody across the goal line. So make sure you're taking care of yourselves through that process so that we can make it. My mentor in Washoe County School District used to say, we're open for business on Monday, which means we got to be ready to do it all again. So take the weekend, take the time that you can have to refuel and replenish so that you can continue to do the great and important work that we all get to do together. So here's a quick overview of our agenda. I will note that about 15 minutes ago or so, I attached the PowerPoint presentation, a PDF of that, as well as a copy of the late liquidation letter that went out a couple of weeks ago. And so those materials have been added to the meeting invite, and you can open up the invite and access those there as the attachments. And we're going to look at federal relief funding at a high level, see how we got to where we are, talk about the period of performance versus an obligation period, liquidation versus late liquidation, our processes and timelines for the late liquidation process as a department, what it means to have a timely and valid obligation, the required information that we have to include when we submit our late liquidation request, and then a little bit of a sneak peek about what happens during any liquidation period and the activities that go on during that time. If you've been here before, you've seen this slide every single month. We prepare content, and throughout the PowerPoint, you'll see there's a slide, a placeholder to support discussion and questions. And so you are welcome to, as we go along, place your questions or comments in the chat. I will track those. If I have not gotten to those by the time we get to the discussion slide, then we will go back and make sure we've caught all the questions that are in the chat. You can also, when we get to a discussion slide, you can raise your hand and take yourself off mute. If you have a more technical question or something that's difficult to put into the chat, that's great as well. These meetings are meant to be collaborative and to make sure that you get the information that you need to be successful in all of your grant endeavors. And today that just happens to be regarding late liquidation of the federal relief funding. If you are a subrecipient that does not have any subawards that are funded by federal relief dollars, then this information will not apply to you. the late liquidation, some of it is applicable to all federal grants, but the late liquidation opportunity is unique to the federal relief funding. So I just want to level set on that. If you have a different federal grant that comes from federal dollars that are not associated with the pandemic recovery funds, then most of this information is not going to apply to those other state grants or other federal grants. And so as an overview, I remember a couple of weeks ago in the news, when I was reading the news, and there was a article on the anniversary of the declaration of the pandemic, of the global pandemic, that pandemic as an emergency. And it kind of hit me in the feels for a second, because it was a really challenging time for many of us. Lots of shifts at the last minute, especially in the education world. Massive changes to going from all in-person learning to online, virtual, or distance learning opportunities. And that while we're all trying to navigate our own health and safety and those of our family members and loved ones, trying to figure all of that out. And the federal government, the U.S. federal government, responded by providing an influx of funding to support that response and recovery. And we refer to that as the federal relief funding. And there were 3 acts that included appropriations of different types from different funds or different accounts within the federal system that made those appropriations. So we often refer to those as 3 rounds of funding. You may have heard it most commonly as ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3 is generally the easiest way to remember that with the acts. So we have the CARES Act, which is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, the CRSA Act, Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. The CARES Act included ESSER 1 and GEAR 1. The CRSA Act included ESSER 2, GEAR 2, and EANS 1. And then the American Rescue Plan Act was that 3rd and final round of federal relief funding that includes ARP ESSER 3, ARP IDEA funds, ARP Homeless Children and Youth funds, and EANS 2 funding. So within each of those acts, there's roughly 15 types of appropriations and accounts that are designated for certain uses. So in our world, we look at the education components of those. But if you can imagine that there were lots of appropriations for small businesses, there were lots of appropriations for the medical field, for research and development of vaccinations. So the U.S. Department of Education is a federal agency with oversight for all the funding, the federal relief funding that was specific to education needs. That includes elementary and secondary school emergency relief, otherwise known as ESSER funds. The ESSER fund did exist before the pandemic and had some grants that were run out of that. The Governor's Emergency Education Relief, or GEAR funds, and the Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools, or EANS fund, are the ones that we're going to be talking about today. I will note as well that the obligation dates and the management of some of the dollars that the Department of Education manages and passes through to you are going to be different than what we're talking about here today. And also want to point out that we do not have information from USAID yet regarding late liquidation for the ARP Homeless Children and Youth funds. But as soon as we have that information, we'll be sure to grab it, review it, and see if there's anything that's majorly different on that. So stay tuned for the ARP Homeless Children and Youth funds. So throughout this presentation, you're going to see me reference grantees or subrecipients. In the language of the federal grant system, the grantee is the state education agency for the purposes of those education dollars and the ESSER funds. We are a prime recipient, otherwise known as a pass-through entity. And as such, there's a number of responsibilities and requirements that we have to adhere to as a pass-through entity. And then we pass funding through to various types of subrecipient entities. So certainly our local education agencies, which are school districts and charter schools, our institutions of higher education, our universities and colleges throughout the state, including some that are outside of the state, and then community-based organizations and nonprofit entities as well. For the ESSER funding, 90% of each round of funding had to go automatically to our LEA partners, those school districts and charter schools. So that was allocated using the Title I funding formula. So the 100% of funding that we got in round one for ESSER 1, 90% automatically went to our school districts and charter authorities, charter associations. And then there was a 0.5% of the total amount that state education agencies were authorized to use for administrative purposes. And then there was 9.5% remaining that we often refer to as the SEA or state non-admin portion. And that is where a number of projects that the department and the state have determined to be critical to response and recovery from the pandemic are funded out of. So many of the categorical funds grants that you've applied for and received funding for come out of that 9.5% of the funding from each of those rounds. So some examples for that might be the School Mental Health Professionals Project that came out of ESSER 2 and GEAR 2. Those both came out of the state's non-admin portion of the federal relief funding. And then governors are given discretion on how GEAR and EANS funding is distributed. And in Nevada, we were tasked with managing those funds on behalf of the governor's office, but the grantee in those cases is technically considered to be the office of the governor for both of those. So when we have the attestation pages that we'll look at or talk about as part of our late liquidation request, an authorized signatory from the governor's office, meaning the governor, is the one that signs that attestation form for GEAR and EANS late liquidation requests. Superintendent Ebert or Deputy Peterson are authorized to sign for the attestation for the ESSER funds. Now, I want to make it very clear that no federal agency, including the U.S. Department of Education, has the authority to extend the period of performance. That's statutorily defined within the Act, each of the acts themselves. Those acts are acts of Congress as signed and approved by the President of the United States. So Congress is not authorized to go in and change, federal agencies are not authorized to go in and change those statutory deadlines. But they do have some discretion in the liquidation period. And so they opted to use that authority for the federal relief funding to allow grantees additional time to continue to spend and liquidate their COVID-19 dollars. And this is unique, as I said earlier, to the pandemic federal relief funding. It does not apply. This opportunity is not available for other federal grants that are not federal relief or pandemic relief funds. So obligation period for each round of federal relief funding for ESSER education funds has always ended on September 30th in alignment with the normal federal fiscal year cycle. That obligation period already automatically included the tidings period, the additional 12 months. And so you can see here when each of the rounds of funding from the CARES Act, CRSA Act, or the ARP Act, when the obligation period ends. And so CARES and CRSA have already obviously passed us September 30th of 22 and 23 respectively. And then we're quickly approaching the end of the obligation period for the ARP ESSER 3 funding, which it will be September 30th of this year in 2024. The funding period end date for the ARP IDEA funds has already ended. It was different within the Act, so that was September 30th of 2023. And we are in the process of scaling up our late liquidation request of those funds. And then often in the department, you'll hear us refer to ARP versus ARPA. That is one of the ways that we're using to differentiate between the American Rescue Plan Act dollars that go straight to the state education agencies, such as ESSER, or the ones that are through the GEAR fund or the EANS fund. But the ARPA dollars are awarded to the office of the governor.
And then also, I know I'm looking in the...
Let me mute everybody. Hold on. As a reminder, if you can just keep your cell phone muted if you can. And so we have a number of projects that we've been tasked with managing on behalf of the governor's finance office. I think one of the most well-known ones is our Assembly Bill 495 funding, and those dollars come from not ESSER, not GEAR, not EANS, but the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. It's a different appropriation within the American Rescue Plan Act that goes to the governor. And the governor's office divvies those up all across the state to all types of different state agencies for different purposes. NDE has about 9 projects that we're managing on behalf of the governor's finance office, and 6 of those are managed through sub-awards. The rest are through contracts. We are waiting for confirmation. I've emailed the Department of Treasury twice now for confirmation of the obligation end date for the state and local fiscal recovery funds, which all evidence suggests is December 31st, 2024. So once we get confirmation of that from the Department of Treasury, I'll be sending out an email that will give you some additional information specific to any subawards that are funded through the ARPA money that we're managing on behalf of the Governor's Finance Office. So that includes AB 495, like I mentioned, it includes a school-based mental health worker extension project, our award to Northern Nevada Literacy Council, as well as Spread the Word Nevada to increase and support literacy. And then our MC3 pilot project that supports CTE learning and internship opportunities. And so we will get you that information on the obligation end date for the ARPA funded subawards that NDE manages, just as soon as we have confirmation of that from the Department of Treasury. Just as a heads up, if it's determined that December 31st, 2024 is indeed the last day of the obligation period for the state and local fiscal recovery funds, we will be amending all of our subaward agreements to make sure that the funding period reflects that obligation date. We won't want to put any of you in a position of having costs that are disallowed because we let you keep spending money keep obligating money after the obligation period had passed. Now, every round of federal relief funding has the regular liquidation period, which is always 100, well, like lately was extended by USAID to be 120 days after the obligation period has ended. And then a late liquidation or a liquidation extension request can add up to an additional 14 months beyond the regular liquidation period as long as it's been approved by the U.S. Department of Education. So if the request is approved and you do the math, 120 calendar days plus 14 months says that you can have roughly 18 months after the obligation period has ended to continue to liquidate your funding during that time frame. We're going to get into the weeds on what that means in a few slides here. What I want to make sure you understand is that the clock starts for that countdown on the day that the obligation period has ended. Does not start on the day that we receive approval of any late liquidation request. And that's important to note because when we talk about our timelines, that's a factor that we considered for the third round of federal relief late liquidation requests. So the furthest that this funding can possibly go for ESSER 2 and GEAR 2 and EANS 1, which were pending our approval of our late liquidation request for those particular funds. The longest we could go on that would be March 28th of 2025, which will be here before we know it. That's a month from tomorrow, if you can believe it. And then the longest that the late liquidation period for ESSER 3 and EANS 2 funds could possibly go would be March 28th, 2026. And so one of the keys that we want to make sure we're doing is submitting that late liquidation request as soon as we can, as soon as we're able to compile and collect all of that data that we have to include on that request so that we get as much of that 18-month possible liquidation period extension as possible. But the 18 months, the 120 days start on October 1st, not on any date that we would get approval from USAID. All right, we've made it to our first question slide, and there's nothing in the chat, which makes me, I don't know, sad or excited. Hopefully it's good that it's all making perfect sense. On the flip side, hopefully it's not that you don't know enough to know which questions you're supposed to be asking right now. And that's okay too, because this is all really new for everyone. So any questions on the allocations, the rounds of funding, the accounts that are associated with those, or the funds that are associated with those, the difference between a period of performance and an obligation period, and then 2 types of liquidation periods. Karen, my friend, nice to see you.
Hi, Amber. And, you know, and I hate to ask this question, but so we're just basically at the mercy as far as time goes on AB 495 to find out what our last date will be.
For now, I would say that if I was a betting woman, which I'm not, I would say that the answer is going to be December 31st, 2024. I could not find any evidence to the contrary, but until I hear back from Treasury, I did get confirmation that from our federal program officer from the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education that she thought that that was also the end date, but suggested that we get confirmation from Treasury on that. And so as soon as we hear it, I'll get that back out to you. But I'm 99.9% confident that it will be December 31st, 2024 for the obligation. I think Lauren or Jill. No, it's Jill.
Hi, Amber.
Hi, Jill.
Related to AB 495, if it is determined that the end of the obligation period is December 31st of 24, will you then be seeking a late liquidation authorization for those funds, or what will the liquidation period look like? Because the initial information we got seems to suggest it went out to 2026, and a little skeptical of that date. So maybe you fill that.
Yeah. When I reached out to Treasury both times, I also included a request for additional information on their late liquidation process. And so I'm hoping to receive that back soon. I looked at 10 different FAQs and official communications from the Department of Treasury. Some of them were very long. And every single date I saw said December 31st, 2024. But I did not see any information about late liquidation or a liquidation extension request in terms of what that might look like. And as a reminder, we still don't have the information on late liquidation of the ARP homeless children and youth funds either. So I think it depends on which sort of subpart of the U.S. Department of Education or the federal government at large is managing those to provide the details on obligation ending and liquidation extensions if they're available.
Okay, we'll just hang out and hear from you.
I'm sorry.
No
yeah,
worries.
they're gonna be like, oh, it's that lady from Nevada again. Maybe someone should answer her email because I'll send another one. I'm doing it every other day. So I think squeaky wheels or something like that. So we'll keep asking.
Okay, thank you.
From Cynthia, for late liquidation, does the work have to be completed by September 30th or just obligated? Can work continue? We are going to get to that like maybe over like 12 different really meaty slides, Cynthia. So I promise we're going to get to that. From Thomas, can you clarify the difference between period of performance and the liquidation period? Yep, we're going to get to that as well. In those slides, we're going to talk about the period of performance and liquidation here in a minute. Anything else on the materials we've covered so far? There's also a general slide at the very end, and we can go back, we can click back through other sections if you think of a question after the fact, that's just fine. So for the third round of federal relief funding that USAID manages, they've recommended that we submit the late liquidation request no later than December 31st, 2024. And so what we've determined, that was our goal last time, it didn't work so well. And so we're going to start even earlier this time. And so what we've determined is that the cutoff date that we're going to use to determine the amount of funding that we will be requesting late liquidation for will be the last day of the obligation period, which is September 30th, 2024. Now, please sit up in your chair, remember, and as a teacher, everyone sit up, eyes forward. I need you to hear this part. That does not mean that you can't submit RFRs after September 30th. The liquidation period is 120 days after the obligation period ends. And that is your normal time for liquidating your costs for all of our federal grants. For you guys, we give you 90 days because we need the extra days to get our closeout completed as well. And so the regular liquidation period continues to happen and operates as it always does while we are waiting for permission and approval of our late liquidation extension request. Okay. So what we are hoping is that this date just provides us a good point in time to gauge the scope of what that late liquidation request is going to entail in terms of funding amounts. Emily, the slides and the letter are attached to the meeting invite, so you should be able to pull them off of that real quick. And we're also wanting to submit the late liquidation request much earlier for this third round of federal relief funding so that we don't have a gap between the liquidation period and the late liquidation period so that we can continue to pay out your RFRs for timely and validly obligated expenditures that you're liquidating during that time period. So right now we're in a holding pattern. Colby, getting to your question, we're still in a holding pattern on ESSER 2 and Gear 2. We had some additional information that we had needed to provide to USAID in terms of justification for that request on some of the subrecipient use of funds. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that again in a few slides. But we're in a holding pattern right now on ESSER 2, Gear 2, and EANS 1 until we receive permission for that. Barbara, March 20th is on a Saturday. There's an FAQ that actually speaks to that when it is on a Saturday and it falls the Monday after. Alrighty. So as you saw in the letter, the late liquidation letter that came out from superintendent a couple of weeks ago, beginning in July, once we've gotten all of our FY25 subaward agreements in place with no blackout periods at all, and everyone's happy and successful before July 1st, then we're going to shift our approach and start meeting with all of our subrecipients that have any subawards that are funded by ESSER 3 dollars. Or what we're going to do is we're going to meet with each subrecipient entity and we'll look at all of your subawards that include any funding from ESSER 3 dollars. So if you're an LEA, a school district charter school, we're going to look at your 90%. And then if you have other subawards from that 9.5% of state non-admin dollars, we've got MTSS coaches, we've got restorative practices, professional development based on restorative justice. We've got some great coursework and CTE projects going, science of reading going. And so if you're a subrecipient of any of those dollars, any of those grants that are funded by the ARP ESSER 3 state non-admin portion, we're going to look at those as well. And we're going to look at your subaward budgets to talk about how are you going to spend as much of this money as you can before the end of September. So priority number one is spend it all within the normal obligation period, right? And then if there are potentially some wrinkles in that and your ability to get all of those dollars expended during the obligation period, then how can we make sure that your subaward budget is structured to give you the most flexibility during a late liquidation, the anticipated late liquidation period. And a key to that is going to be making sure that we meet federal definitions for timely obligation, and we're going to get to that in a second. During that time frame, when we start meeting with our programmatic colleagues and staff from GMU with each of our subrecipient entities, we'll also be collecting the information that we have to include in the late liquidation request template. And we'll look at what those requirements are at the very end of our time together today. So July is going to kick up some intensive work to make sure we're on track to spend down, and anything that we anticipate not being able to spend down before September 30th, we've built in and made sure that it's timely obligated so that they're eligible for an extension, liquidation extension opportunity. Now, for both ESSER 2 Gear 2 and ESSER 3, as soon as we have approval from USAID on those late liquidation requests, then we are going to provide to you a report that shows how much funding is available by the sub awards that you had as of that date and as approved by USAID. So if you can imagine that we have we drew a line in the sand. We said, here's what money is remaining as of October 1st, September 30th has passed. Here's the amount of money you have across all of your different ESSER 3 subawards. And in theory, and ideally, you've been submitting RFRs since then, right? Between October 1st and the end of January during the normal liquidation period. And so that amount should decline. And so we will crosswalk any funding that is approved for a late liquidation opportunity with what amount you actually have left at that point in time. And that balance will be the amount, your new allocation for a late liquidation subaward. And what will happen is, and we did this with CARES ESSER $1, we cloned the funding application within ePage and renamed it as a late liquidation subaward. So it was CARES ESSER 1 late liquidation. And we upload your budget as it stood on the last day of the obligation period on September 30th. But your allocation amount obviously is going to be less than that. And so you'll be required to do a budget revision to align the the total amount of your late liquidation subaward budget with what you have available. And then you'll also have an opportunity to do a true up revision if you need to. So for example, if you had a purchase order out for supplies and there were delays in delivery for whatever reason, and then the supplies show up and you didn't get all of them, right? You ordered 2,000 textbooks, but 1,800 showed up, and you're not going to get those other 200. And so you need to adjust the amount of that expenditure so it aligns with the actual invoice and cost that's allowed, as long as it fits within those expenditures that we've deemed are timely obligated and that have been approved for late liquidation. And then you'll submit your RFRs through the ePage system as you normally do throughout the end of the late liquidation period that we give you. I will note that the March dates are the end date, the backstop for all late liquidation activities, including those at NDE. So your late liquidation end date, we will need to have all of your final things done no later than 30 days before that, so that we've got time to close out our reports and complete the closeout process from the state level to the federal level. And then if the subaward is managed in a paper process, then a similar process will be used for late liquidation of those subawards as well, where you'll have an updated subaward, a new subaward that's a late liquidation subaward that builds off of your budget as it stood on September 30th. That's partly why we'll be meeting with you in July and August, so that we're anticipating those expenditures that you may not be able to draw before the funding period, obligation period ends, so that you can continue to do so during liquidation legally and compliantly. And so when you do go to do that budget for your late liquidation subaward, it should be relatively clean. It should just be some true ups and then aligning dollar amounts. All right, I've got a bunch of questions. All right, Diane, we're actually going to look at what constitutes timely obligation and written binding written commitment in just a minute. So we'll definitely look at service agreement versus a subaward. From Kelly, checking for understanding. If we want to take advantage of the late liquidation period to extend services through June 2025, we will have to make the decision to obligate those funds before September 30th. However, we will not know if we are able to obligate for use during the late liquidation period until, well, the end of January. In case USAID denies a request, the district must carry the risk for the full amount included in the late liquidation request. I'll say, first of all, Kelly, that USAID has stated on a number of occasions that they have not denied any late liquidation requests to date for any of the rounds of funding. They're as interested in making sure these dollars get to where the needs are as we are. The only things that have slowed up the process is when additional information is required from the grantee or the state. And as long as we can provide adequate justification for why a liquidation extension is needed, and that we can demonstrate that timely obligation occurred prior to the end of the obligation period, then we don't anticipate having any of those denied or not approved. I want to highlight a little portion of your question, because we're going to get into the weeds on that here in a second. But you obligate funds via a binding written commitment. And you have to do that before the end of the obligation period. And so what happens during a liquidation period is that you liquidate those funds that were obligated, timely, and valid. You're not making new obligations. You cannot make new obligations after the obligation period has ended. So you will, if you, for example, have a contract for services, professional development, or some of you may have construction or renovation, remodeling projects to, support healthier air and conditions in your school, or cleaner, more easily cleaned surfaces and flooring. And if you have a contract for that work, or for that service, for that good in place by the end of September, you can continue paying off of it during the normal liquidation period, and you should. And then if there's a late liquidation extension approved, then you will have an additional amount of time to continue to liquidate those dollars. But again, the goal here is to spend down as many of those dollars as we can well before September 30th. And any that we can't get across the goal line by September 30th, ideally we've liquidated before the end of the normal liquidation period, so that those things that are left for a late liquidation period are really the exceptions and not the norm. But you have, as long as we can make sure and we can justify that it was timely and validly obligated before the funding, that obligation period ended, we don't anticipate that you'd have any problems continuing to pay off of that. We cannot have a contract go past the late liquidation end date, though. So your contracts have to have been fully liquidated if they're being funded fully by the federal relief dollars by the end of the late liquidation period. And that is a decision that was made by our governor's finance office. All right. Thanks, Lisa, for catching that as well. Anything else in terms of the timelines or the supports that we will be providing to you as we head into the end of the obligation period? Process for late liquidation subaward, a separate one. Hopefully we're having those conversations very soon for your ESSER 2 and Gear 2 funded projects. And so we'll test drive it there. We've test driven it a little bit with ESSER 1. We'll see how many more things we can break with ESSER 2. So by the time we get to ESSER 3, it'll be tight. All right. Key terms. So liquidating versus obligating. So liquidating comes out of 2 CFR 200-344 paragraph B. And it talks about what a liquidation is to draw down expenditure of funds by a grantee for obligations that were incurred during the legal obligation period. And so you're essentially able to continue to pay off the obligations that you made. And the regular liquidation period is that 120 days after the obligation period has ended. Now, to obligate funds, the definition of what it means to have a good or a service obligated comes from 34 CFR 76707. And they occur, a time of obligation occurs for services or assistance provided through a contract. And then if you do that, the obligation is made on the date that the state or subgrantee makes a binding written commitment to obtain the services, work, or products. For rental or lease of real or personal property, the obligation is made when the property is used. So both of those definitions came straight out of the late liquidation request template that we have to complete and submit to USED as part of this. And you can click on the hyperlinks to see those portions of CFR if you are excited to look at them. A late liquidation period is not extended time for us to figure out how we want to spend the money. Those decisions need to have been made and documented via a binding written agreement, in other words, a legal contract of some type, during the obligation period. What the liquidation period is it gives us extra time to spend or liquidate the funding for materials and services that were obligated properly within the allowable obligation period and for allowable services. Okay, so late liquidation period is not like extra money, extra time to keep messing around with your budget and identifying new strategies or activities. It says that you've identified everything you were going to do. It's all been obligated properly. And now you've got some extra time to continue to pay off on those contracts, pay out on those contracts. So I think the key that I heard over and over and over in all the webinars and in all the reading materials that I have had the opportunity to peruse for the last several weeks, timely and valid obligation is the key to your success. Timely and valid obligation is what is going to allow us the greatest flexibility in taking advantage of the late liquidation opportunity. So what does this mean, timely and valid? So 34 CFR 76707, as I mentioned, provides a table that looks just like this. And it says, if the obligation is for the type of good or service that's identified in the left-hand column, then it's considered obligated on the date or when in the information that's in the right-hand column. And so as it said a minute ago, rental of real or personal property is obligated when they use the property. And that has some implications that we'll talk about here in a second. Finding written commitment is the key for timely obligation. It applies during a regular liquidation period. These are the same requirements that we have to use for any liquidation of federal funding, not just federal relief funding. But it also extend the stipulations for timely obligation extend to the late liquidation period as well. The difference is in when a good or service is considered to be timely obligated has to be taken into account when we are reporting properly obligated funds within the late liquidation request. And a special highlight here we're going to spend a couple slides looking at is for personal services. It always makes me giggle every time we talk about the chart of accounts and the object code 100 series. Inevitably someone tells me that it is a typo or that we have a homophone that says personal instead of personnel, and I keep saying no, it's actually legitimately called personal services. And so services that are provided by individuals, either as an employee or of the subrecipient entity, or as a contractor of subrecipient entity, they have two different definitions for when it's been timely obligated. So first, looking at employees, an employee of a state or subrecipient, their services are considered to be obligated on the date that the services are performed. So what that means is that payroll for employees can only cover time worked, contract hours through the obligation period. Once October 1st happens, if you have any employees of your subrecipient entity that are having their payroll, their salaries and benefits covered by federal relief funding, our BESSER funding, starting on October 1st, you are not able to use that funding to continue to cover those payroll costs. Employees, the services are obligated on the day in which the services were provided, the day that the educator worked, that the school counselor worked, the family engagement specialist. On the flip side, for individuals, personal services provided by a contractor who is not an employee of the subrecipient entity. For example, if they are paid through a temp agency, not through, we have a number of contractors in the state that are funded in different ways here at NDE. If your paycheck comes through a third-party temp agency, such as Manpower, as one of the approved agencies that the state is able to work with, then those payroll costs can continue to be covered through any liquidation period. So that means that if I've got a team of awesome federal leave contractor analysts, the contract is that work was timely obligated via our contract with Manpower. And so we're able to continue to pay their cover their payroll costs through any liquidation or late liquidation period. On the flip side, if we have folks who are paid as employees of the Department of Education, not through a third-party entity, then once we hit October 1st, their payroll costs, salary and benefits cannot be covered by the ARPS or $3. Timely obligation of public utility services, travel, and rental of real or personal property also occurs when the services are received for public utility services, when the travel is taken, or when the property is used, meaning on the date that the public utility services are received, that the date that the travel is taken or that rented property is used. This means that those costs cannot be covered after October 1st. Because they were not timely obligated, don't meet the definition for timely obligation in 34 CFR 76707. However, acquisition of real or personal property, such as goods and supplies, or the performance of work that's other than personal services. So you've got a contract for construction services. You've got a contract for professional development. Many of you have contracted mental health providers or family engagement providers within your sub-award budgets. Those are obligated on the date upon which the contract was fully executed. So if you have a contract in place before September 30th for those construction services, for those professional development services or trainings, for a subscription service to some of our online digital learning platforms, as long as that was fully executed before the obligation period ended, that does meet the definition for timely obligation. That's often done through a contract or a service agreement, a purchase order, and those things do need to be executed before the end of the funding or the obligation period ended. So if you're trying to purchase supplies, if you've got a subscription that you need to extend for an additional year or so during the liquidation or liquidation extension period, those things all need to have a purchase order in place or contract in place, a service agreement in place no later than September 30th, 2024, in order for it to be timely obligated. We do not have to submit the evidence of timely obligation when we submit our late liquidation request, but we are required to provide it upon request for monitoring or auditing purposes. And so we did have some questions that I mentioned earlier from our ESSER 2 and GEAR 2 late liquidation requests that we need to go back and provide some of that documentation for to demonstrate timely obligation for those things. And so I've also linked here for you the FY 2023 compliance supplement, as well as the cross-cutting section specific to US Ed, so you can see some of what the monitoring and auditing requirements specific to these dollars are as we head into those potential activities. One important distinction that is kind of newer in, I am not sure that they've placed this in one of the FAQ documents quite yet, but there's been a lot of discussion on post-secondary scholarships. So if we have subawards from federal relief dollars that supports post-secondary scholarships, there are two ways to demonstrate timely obligation. Both require a binding written commitment. Big surprise. You can either have a binding written commitment between the grantee or the subrecipient entity and the individual student, or you can have a binding written agreement between the grantee and the entity to provide post-secondary scholarship services. But both of those require some backup documentation, some terms and conditions that provide specifications. So in the case of scholarships to individual students, it has to, that binding written commitment must detail the how the award payments will be made and what the eligibility for the scholarship are. And similarly, in a commitment, binding written commitment to provide scholarship services or financial award payments, the terms of the agreement have to include the conditions under which those will be awarded, including the number of students, eligibility criteria, when those payments will be made. That also the binding rent commitment also has to demonstrate that the costs are reasonable and necessary, and that they're going to be used to support activities that are allowable according to the requirements of the grant. So a little bit of interesting nuance for post-secondary scholarships and timely obligation. A valid obligation says that it is that obligation for expenditures meets allowability requirements and criteria. So in our grantee attestation that we have to sign and submit with our late liquidation request, we'll see the list of all the things that we attest to, but we have to maintain oversight through any liquidation period. And consistent with those attestations, it also has to be consistent with the original terms and conditions of the grant award. And that the expenditures are for strategies and activities that are allowable. Now, allowability is partly defined. Reasonable, necessary, allowable comes from 2 CFR Part 200, Section 403. And that's within the cost principles section of 2 CFR Part 200, subpart E. And additionally, for federal relief funding, so those cost principles are generalized to all federal grants. In terms of the ESSER 3 funds, the determination of allowability also has to meet the original intent of the funding, which is to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. And it has to align with Nevada's ARP ESSER state plan, which I've hyperlinked for you here. Now, we do have an ability to amend our state plan if we need to in order to expand strategies and activities that we anticipate are still required. During a liquidation period that will meet the needs to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. But it does have to be an activity that we spoke to in our state plan that we had to submit and get approval for from USAID as a condition for receiving the ARP ESSER $3. All right, bring it on. I know we have to have some questions on timely and valid obligation. So going back up, a service agreement, a subaward is specifically, a subaward alone is not considered to be a binding written commitment for definitions of timely obligation. The expenditures within a subaward budget have each of those have to have some demonstration of timely obligation, but the subaward alone does not constitute a binding written agreement in most cases. From Judith, clarifying question, timely obligation for contract services needs to occur by 930 days, okay, to receive services and benefits after the period of performance and during late liquidation period. Absolutely it is, Judah, you got it exactly right. So the contract has to be in place by September 30th, and then that's exactly what liquidation and late liquidation is meant to support, that you're able to continue to liquidate, to spend those dollars for that contract and request reimbursement from us for that throughout the liquidation period as well as the late liquidation period. They cannot go beyond that, though. Jill.
Sorry. I have a question on obligation and liquidation as it relates to the AB 495 fund.
I'll do my best. I haven't seen their guidance yet.
So I'm looking at the FAQ document that NDE put out in August of 22, I think it was.
Specific to AB 495?
Yes. And
okay.
There is a question on here, number 24. Can an LEA hire and pay employees through December 31st of 2026, which we understand that January of 25 through 26 would be the liquidation period. And it asks if we can continue to pay employees during that time. And the answer in the FAQs is yes, we can pay salaries through December 31st, 2026 if they are approved through the competitive application process and included in the executed final subaward. To me, that seems to contradict
absolutely does.
FR 76. And
Yep.
the reason I'm concerned is that we do have employees that are what we consider contracted as opposed to hourly employees that we pay with these funds, whose positions we were intending to fund with AB 495 funds for the next fiscal year.
Yeah.
And now I am concerned, highly concerned, that this might not be accurate guidance. Can we get some clarification on that?
Absolutely, we will. And I would agree with your assessment, Jill. I think when we were rolling these out, and I will just note that the guidance on late liquidation, the late liquidation opportunity, which is unique to the federal relief funding, has been slow in coming, including whether or not 34 CFR 76707 was going to be required or not, if there was going to be some type of waiver to that. But if we are to determine what I think we're going to determine, which is that the obligation period ends on December 30th of 24, then we will amend that FAQ document, and that will also, obviously require subaward amendments based on the more accurate information and understanding that we have now.
So, but we're in the process right now of putting together our FY25 overall district budget. And we have not planned for these employees that are in AB 495 to come back to the general fund next year based on guidance that we received that we could continue to pay these people all of next year.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be critical that we get an answer sooner rather than later, because this is going to impact quite a few people in our district.
Yeah, and I've had the same concerns, Jill. We've actually tried to get this information maybe 17 different ways, 17 different times. And like I said, I'll send another email today. I'm going to just bug them until they respond, I suppose. And I wish there was a hotline I could call and talk to somebody. But again, I've looked at least 10 different documents specific to the state and local fiscal recovery funds, and all of them say December 31st, and they all reference 34 CFR 76707 as well. But I did ask for Treasury to provide more information about that, and I promise I will keep hounding them until we get an answer. It's too bad I didn't know last week when we were in DC together, huh, Jill, because we could have just gone and banged on the front door.
I know, right?
We answered our question. Hi, we have a question. You're not responding to our email.
This is really concerning to us, and I don't know if others are in the same predicament, because we did rely on guidance from NDE when we made those decisions. So the sooner we can get an answer, then the better. That will help us figure out next steps.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
For sure. Of course. All right, Diane's got a question in the chat. If our service agreement currently has a term end date of June 30th, 2024, will we need to obtain a term extension amendment from the state in order to be eligible for inclusion in the late liquidation plan? Will an amendment by the state to our service agreement constitute the continued timely obligation of funding from the state to our organization? So it depends on the relationship here between the state and your entity. So Diane, I'm not completely certain which entity you're with, but you as the entity must have a binding written agreement or commitment through that service agreement with whoever's providing those services. Now, if you are the one providing those services and we are the holder of that service agreement, then we would amend the service agreement end date to allow for that flexibility. If we're the instigators of that service agreement or that contract, if we're the holder. So if you're the subrecipient and you are contracting with another vendor to provide services through a service agreement, then you would need to amend that service agreement between yourself and that vendor to at least go through liquidation period so that you could continue to draw those funds during through January. But if you anticipate needing late liquidation, I would go ahead and extend your service agreement as far out as you're able to, based on your own procurement policies and requirements. Let's see. Scrolling. I knew this is where we would get the good questions, the meaty questions. Nicole had asked earlier, I'm trying to scroll but make sure I didn't miss any. Judah, I think I answered your question. Okay. Nicole, clarifying question. I apologize if I missed this. Do we notify you if we would like to request an extension, or is this something GMU is requesting on behalf of all recipients? So in general, our approach is to request every penny. That gives us the greatest flexibility and the most opportunity to spend all of those dollars and make sure they're getting to the needs in the places that they were meant to. What we have done for ESSER 1 and ESSER 1 Gear 1, ESSER 2 Gear 2, and EANS 1 is we submitted the request on behalf of all of our subrecipient entities, and then we will come back and have a conversation about what's viable. For ESSER 3, because we're in a better position heading into the process, when we start to have those meetings with each subrecipient entity in July and August, and we look at each of your subaward budgets, and we collect the information that we have to enter into the request template, that's when we'll have those conversations. And if as a subrecipient entity, you say, we're just not going to be able to use this funds, that could open up an opportunity to us for us to reallocate those dollars. So as you're looking at your subaward budgets and saying, we're doing the best we can, but there are, staffing shortages. We can't fill these counselor positions, or we can't fill these parapro positions because the bodies just aren't out there in the workforce. And if there's no other way to amend your budget for other allowable strategies or activities and expenditures that you could continue to spend during both obligation and liquidation periods, and you want to revert those back to us so that we can reallocate them to another subrecipient entity, please reach out to us sooner than later. On the flip side, if you're like, hey, we are cranking through this money and we could really use some more, we're a little worried about being able to cover all of the remaining needs that we have, let us know sooner than later as well, because that provides us an opportunity to sort of rebalance the funding and make sure that it can get to the people who are able to use it during the obligation period, and not take a risk of reverting those funds. I have joked on a number of occasions that I used to think a lot of things were sins, and now I think there's maybe 2 things that are sins, but one of them is absolutely giving money back to the government, both the state or the federal level, because those are sacred dollars. Those are public dollars that families sacrifice from their budgets in order to pay their taxes. And there's an expectation. I know when I pay my taxes, here in a couple of weeks, not to trigger anyone or make anyone go into a panic attack, but tax day's coming. When I pay those taxes, there's an expectation on my part that it's going to result in a good or a service that's going to benefit my community, my fellow citizens in some way. And so when we can't get those dollars to those needs as quickly as we need to, we run the risk of having them go back into the coffers, either the general fund at the state or at the federal level. And we lose an opportunity to use those resources for needs that we know our kids and educators have. So we want to make sure that we're good partners and we're being as proactive as we can during the next six or so months to make sure that we've got the dollars where they need to be, where they will likely be fully expended or liquidated during liquidation. And if it's not in the cards for you with that money, we will have a conversation and talk about whether it makes sense to reallocate them. But we'll also talk about whether it makes sense to include those dollars in the late liquidation request when we have those meetings. So hopefully, Nicole, that answers your question. Brian, are these funds subject to supplant rules? Can LEAs play the shell game to keep playing employees? The ARPS or $3 do not have the supplement, not supplant provision, Brian. But what they will need to do is to appropriately code their employees' payroll costs after the obligation period is ended to something other than federal relief dollars. Those can't be used for those purposes. Okay. All right, Kathy. Hi, Kathy. We will appreciate the one-on-one assistance to ensure our applications are structured to give us flexibility through the late liquidation period. Is there a hard deadline for budget revisions in ePage for the September 30th deadline? So those deadlines are going to be the same as they always have been, and it will be referenced in your assurances. We ask for the final full budget revision to be completed no later than 60 days before the funding period ends. Part of that was so we have plenty of time to make sure that the revision doesn't have any additional corrections or those kinds of things. But we are getting faster at that. And then the last 2 fiscal years, we've allowed for a limited scope budget revision in the last 30 days or so to true up payroll expenses, so salaries and benefits, and then any expenses for contracted employees. We've allowed that roughly 30 days before. As I mentioned last month during our GMU office hour, I look forward to the day that we can accept those budget revisions in a much shorter time frame and get those turned around for you as we get more efficient on our side. I will also say that there's risk. When you get a budget revision submitted right at the deadline, if it does not get approved, and you've already made those expenditures, you've already incurred those costs, we're not going to be able to reimburse you for them. So that's one of the reasons we don't want to get too close to the end of that, to that deadline. Hopefully that answers your question, Kathy, and just let me know if not. Now, Jill, from Karen. Jill, thank you. Nye County School District is in the same situation. We had planned to avoid the funding cliff. Now we are facing one based on the information that was provided to us. We do need to know as quickly as possible. And I agree. I feel that pain. I've had that heartburn myself. Like I said, and in the wonderful opportunities to learn everything about liquidation that I never wanted to know these past several weeks, I have come across a lot more information that makes that heartburn worse on the part of the AB 495 and other ARPA funded projects. So we are working very hard to get that clarification and confirmation as soon as we can. All righty. I am going to try to get us through the rest of our slides quickly, but please continue to put any questions you have in the chat. New to the ESSER 3 late liquidation request, which includes EANS 2 as well, we now have to also include a cover letter. So there's a template, a workbook, an Excel file that we have to complete and submit. We have to submit a separate template for each of the types of funds. But we now have to include a cover letter that explains how the liquidation extension request contributes to the acceleration of academic success. And we have to include a reference to how we've supported expedited liquidation funds. So that's where we would talk about our process, right? Where we held a webinar, today's office hour, we provided the letter, we provided supports, and then we meet with each of our subrecipients to make sure that we are getting those dollars spent as much as we can, and that there's we have plans to expedite those, expedite the liquidation of those funds, and that we will continue to provide those supports and to maximize those investments. The cover letter also needs to highlight evidence-based strategies that will best support student performance. And these 3 here, you may recognize from the OG ARP ESSER 3 funding. These have been some of the key priorities with ARP ESSER 3 since the beginning. So increasing daily student attending, providing high quality tutoring, and increasing access to extended learning opportunities, both before and after school and during summer hours. And we also should consider increasing access to mental health services, offering coaching, professional development, or investing in infrastructure. And so we will, we have to speak to the use, how these funds will be used, and provide a justification for the late liquidation extension request. But we do need in the cover letter to kind of provide some rationale and justification for why we believe as an entity that these are a good investment in continuing to prevent, prepare, and respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. There's a template, this workbook that we complete and submit for each late liquidation request. It includes a grantee attestation tab, which has to be signed by an authorizing official of the grantee entity. And so, as I mentioned earlier, for the ESSER dollars, that can be Superintendent Ebert or Deputy Superintendent Peterson. For EANS and GEAR, it had to be the governor. And these are the things that we attest to as a grantee when we sign that. That we will, that all the information data that we've included is complete and accurate, that all the activities that we've included in the request are allowable and that they've been properly obligated, meaning timely obligations. So as an agency, pass-through entity, we have to make sure we say that we've done all of these things or that we will continue to do these things. Again, that the certifications associated with the original award remain in effect for us and our subrecipients through the duration of the late liquidation period. And that continued monitoring and oversight will continue to provide those services. That if they require data verification of obligated and liquidated amounts, we can provide that backup data. That sufficient documentation to support that request. Those are the things like demonstrating that it was timely obligated, that documentation exists and is on file. And that we have, as a pass-through entity, have evaluated you as subrecipients based on risk to make sure that you've got the capacity to continue to liquidate those funds. And I want you to know that a grantee, state education agency, has the discretion to determine which subrecipients to request late liquidation on behalf of or not. And so if we have a subrecipient entity that has very high risk score, that we've had a number of challenges in helping them be able to expend and draw down their federally funds, and we're concerned about their capacity to do so accurately, effectively, efficiently, and compliantly, we do not have to include that subrecipient entity in the late liquidation request. I don't anticipate that would be an issue, but I want to make sure you understand that is a discretion that's given to grantees. We have to do a separate template for each fund. So we'll have one, recently the ones we submitted early in the calendar year were for ESSER 2, a template for GEAR 2, and a template for EANS 1. Those are all separated. They have different award numbers and different attestation people who are the authorizing official and those kinds of things. The template has a grantee tab. That's for funds that the state education agency uses. And then there's a tab for subrecipients. And when we request for subrecipients, we put all of your funds, we make that request in aggregate, meaning that there is a single row in the Excel spreadsheet for each subrecipient entity, and that the information for that subrecipient is reported on the aggregate. So it says if you're a school district and you have ARP ESSER 3 LEA formula funds, those portion that were awarded via the Title I formula, and you've got, say you've got $500,000 left in that award. And then you also happen to have the progressive discipline based on restorative justice subaward, and you've got $50,000 left in that one. And you also happen to have MTSS coaches or the MC3. No, MC3 is not going to be that one, ARPA funding. If you have any of the other subawards from state non-admin portions of ARP ESSER 3, we're going to combine all of those amounts into one lump sum. And that's what we report as the allocation total. We provide your name and your UEI number, your unique entity identifier number. And then we do the allocation total for all subawards that you have from ESSER 3, how much we've obligated as of the obligation period end date, and how much has been liquidated as of that point in time. So remember, we said that was going to be as of September 30th. The form then generates a percentage of the funds that have been liquidated as well as the balance that's remaining. And then we can either carry forward the balance that's remaining if we're going to request all of it, or we can say this subrecipient entity ended up with roughly $1 million left over, but we're only going to request late liquidation for $755,000 or something. And that would come out of those conversations that we'd had together in July and August so that we're all on the same page. And then we have to provide a brief description of the use of funds. How are the dollars that we are requesting permission to continue to liquidate? For what purposes are those funds? So oftentimes we'll say supplies, or there could be a construction contract or an HVAC, servicing or modernization. Could be the purchase orders, right? So what are the use of funds, and then a justification for why we need late liquidation for each of those uses of funds. So if you said we have contract, we have supplies that are out on a purchase order, And then under the justification, we'll say this contract for this construction work was delayed because of labor shortages. And the contractor, the subcontractors for those were not able to be fully staffed and meet their deliverables within the timeframes that we had anticipated. For purchase orders, you might say something like, the purchase order was made, but there were supply chain issues, or there were issues in delivery and for some reason, or it came in little bits at a time. I know I heard during the federal title directors meeting, many of you lamenting about how textbooks get delivered one or two at a time sometimes, and how maddening that can be in terms of your invoices for those. And then if there's any additional information that we believe might help our federal program officer to review and look at that and to note that it is timely obligated, we can put that information there. It's not required, but if it could expedite review and approval in places where there's a unique request, we can provide a little information. For ARP ESSER 3, this line did not used to be in the late liquidation request template, but there's a very clear line that says that needing more time to expend funds is not adequate justification. Saying, well, we just didn't get all of our purchase orders submitted is not adequate justification, or we didn't have time to figure out how many more Chromebooks we needed to replace as part of our replacement schedule, or those kinds of things. So needing more time will not be accepted. And in fact, that's one of the things that we're clarifying in our ESSER 2 Gear 2 request, is that we're not simply needing more time, it's that there were delays in some of the use of funds that we included in those. And so here's some examples that they provide of adequate justification. But simply saying, yep, shoot, we just ran out of time is not going to cut it. All right. Anything on the required information that we have to submit in that template, I can show it to you if you really want to. If you love a beautiful Excel file, this is not the file for you. It is not beautiful, but it is functional, and it is the one that we get to use. So we can walk through it if you're really, really excited about it. Or if maybe you just need a nap or something right now. Any other questions on the, okay, Kelly, would continued pandemic student instructional mental health impacts serve as adequate justification? Yes, so we can extend services for another year. So you'd say we have a contract in place for a contracted mental health provider to come in and provide mental health services on site, groups, individual supports, whatever it might be. And those needs continue to be felt by our students, and we need to be able to continue to provide those through this contract. Would be an absolutely appropriate justification. You've timely obligated it through the contract, and then you've demonstrated the need to say these, I mean, they're never going to go away, right? The needs for those supports are always going to be present. Hopefully they decrease a little bit as we get to more kids and give them the supports that they need. But I am a firm believer, as many of you know, I came to the state to run the Social Workers in School state block grant, and my master's is in social work. So I have a special place in my heart for those specialized instructional support personnel. Any other questions? Oh, and thanks, Marielle, for answering Marissa's question in the chat. Yes, the recording will be posted to our YouTube channel as soon as I can get it up there for you. And I'll send you out an email with the link to that as soon as it has been posted so that you can access it easily. All right. Once we head into the liquidation period, then we have, it's not just we all kick back and relax and wait for the liquidation period to end. Our normal oversight and monitoring activities have to continue through the liquidation period. This includes that we collect and monitor and maintain, review that backup documentation. We have to maintain our own, as do you. And we will, as we look at the liquidation at your subboard budgets heading into the end of the obligation period in anticipation of a successful late liquidation request, we'll be asking for copies of your contracts, just so that we can say that we reviewed those to make sure that they were timely obligated before including them in a late liquidation request. That's our responsibility. So we'll be looking for copies of those binding written commitments. We will also continue to be monitored by USAID. I gave you a link there to USAID's monitoring and reporting webpage specific to these dollars. We also have to continue to monitor you for timeliness and allowability of those liquidations. We also get to keep doing our annual reporting. As long as we have money, we're going to get to report on it. And so I give you the link there to the Education Stabilization Fund Transparency Portal, which is where all of our annual performance reports are uploaded and reported and made available to the public. A unique part about late liquidation, fun fact here for all of you grant nerds out there, when we're in late liquidation period, then the draws that we submit to G6 are considered route pay, which means we'll submit the draw request, and then we have to subsequently and simultaneously communicate with our federal program officer that we have submitted a draw, and we have to provide information in that email or in some type of document attachment spreadsheet that says these are all of the subrecipients and the amounts that are included in this draw request, because our federal program officer has a responsibility to monitor that spend down of the late liquidation and make sure that it aligns with the subrecipients and the amounts that we included in that request. And again, they always have the right to request the documentation that demonstrates that that was timely obligated, that demonstrates that it's allowable, those kinds of things. But there are a couple extra steps for route pay during a late liquidation period. All right, I've given you a lot of extra links here. These are also, most of them are at the bottom of the late liquidation letter that we provided. That's also attached to the meeting invite. The webinar, that's the fourth bullet here in the first bucket, Art Besser and Ian's liquidation extension webinar, I thought was very well done. You can go to that link, will take you to the recordings and materials for all of the webinars that they've provided on these federal relief fundings from the very beginning. This currently is the top link, so they're listed in most recent to oldest. So the very top set of bullet points on that webpage right now are the January 18th webinar. I streamed it as I was commuting to be able to access that information. I thought they did a very good job. I've also given you the OESE, Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, deadline and announcements website. And there's a lot of information on that website and a lot of cross links to additional resources and information. That's sort of your landing page or your for all things federal relief. And then I've given you the two most recently updated FAQs and letters on late liquidation of ARPESR 3, both dated January 9th that were published. And then in the bottom set of links, you've got your live links to different sections of CFR that govern this process. So we've got when obligations are made in 34 CFR 76707 that we spent a lot of time talking about. The 2 CFR 200-344 speaks to closeout of federal grants, and then Part 200 subpart E in general is cost principles, and then reasonable, allowable, necessary is in 200-403 paragraph B. So you can access all of those links at your leisure. As a reminder, we host an office hour from the Grants Management Unit in the second and third months of each calendar year quarter. In the first month of each calendar year quarter, so January, April, July, and October, we hold a quarterly subrecipient meeting. So April's meeting will be a quarterly subrecipient meeting. We'll go over a lot of updates. I will send out the survey about 3 weeks in advance of that to collect any questions or agenda items requests you have for that meeting that you'd like us to cover or speak to. Ideally, I'll have an update on, for example, the ARPA state and local fiscal recovery funds that we can review at that meeting as well. And so these are some of the topics that we've covered in the office hours. So while the subrecipient meetings, those quarterly subrecipient meetings are meant to be general information for the good of the order and responsive to any updates that you request from us, the office hours are meant to be topic and content specific. So we've covered a lot of topics in the last 2 years in our time together in this collaboration. And so We have not always had an office hour because I don't believe in holding a meeting just to hold a meeting. But if you guys have additional needs for additional technical assistance and support, please do reach out to us so that we can get those scheduled. So if that needs to happen on an individual basis for your organization, your entity, we will absolutely do that. But it's also helpful for us because sometimes we don't know that it's a need. We don't know that it's something confusing. We don't know that some requirement we've put in place is making your life miserable unless you tell us. And so we need that feedback from you so that we can continue to provide high quality supports and technical assistance in our collective efforts to manage these grant dollars. I'm working to get the rest of those posted to the YouTube channel. Diane, I'll get that to you in an email just as soon as I have the. You can access it on the department's webpage through the boards and commissions links. But I will get you the link specifically for the grants management unit playlist that we created within the department's YouTube channel so that you can access this recording as soon as we can get it posted. We also use our universal email account, grantsinfo@doe.mv.gov. This is one of those where I want my slide to do the little flashing neon signs. Any questions you have about grants, please always include grants info. If you don't know who the question should go to, you can send it to grants info. We'll make sure it gets to the right person for you. So before I show you the link to and the QR code to the post-session evaluation and feedback form, any burning questions that have bubbled up in your brain on any of the content we've covered so far? A lot of new material for sure. And I wanted to make sure to mention that USAID is hosting a couple of technical assistance hours for grantees in the next couple of months that I'll be registering for. If you have questions about our BESSER late liquidation and we didn't cover it, or I can't answer it for you, then I will absolutely take that to those TA sessions and make those requests during those opportunities so that we can get you an answer. So when you wake up around 2:30 in the morning and you have a light bulb moment and say, oh my gosh, I forgot to ask this question, or what does this mean? Or maybe I misheard this, shoot me an email, get it to grantsinfo@doe.mv.gov, and we'll make sure it gets to my inbox. If I can't answer the question for you, then I will absolutely forward that question on to our federal program officer and bring it to the TA sessions as well. All right, look at that, 1 minute ahead. That was a really content-heavy slide deck. I think it's important to be so because we want that to be a reference for you and useful and helpful to you as you go through it, though. If you have any questions on it, please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know. The evaluation and feedback forms are really helpful for us to make sure if there's anything that we can do better, and if we can make the materials more clearly presented or provided, those kinds of things. So please pick your little phone camera up and you can point it right at the QR code and click that link to go take that should take you no less than 3 minutes. Or no more than 3 minutes. It's a bunch of Likert scale questions and an agreement scale. So for the most part, and then there's some fillable open narrative if you have any additional feedback to provide. We always appreciate that. I hope that you're all able to get some type of rest and relaxation during this spring break time. I think for many of us that came from districts, one of the biggest adjustments is that we don't get the fall breaks and the winter breaks and the spring breaks. And it's a little bit soul crushing sometimes when you get to that point, you're like, what do you mean I don't have 2 weeks off over the winter holidays? But I hope that each of you is able to take some time enjoy the coming spring and nature. That we do have a total solar eclipse happening on April 8th that I will be in Conway, Arkansas for. My son and I reserved an Airbnb 2 years ago because we are those nerds. And so we're excited about that. So get out, enjoy some nature, feed your soul, do the things that you need to take care of you so that we can collectively support each other in such important work. So have a fantastic rest of your week, and we will see you next month.